Hello, I'm Claudine, and you're witnessing the beginnings of my journey on YouTube as an artist. I'm a personal trainer by day, and I've been doing that for over 8 years, and I love food and cozy art. Speaking of cozy art, I was inspired by this idea of painting bears in this so-called berry bread factory because of my older sister's childhood teddy bear named Amber Berry. Hence, Berry Bread Factory. We grew up with the Berenstain Bears, which is Berenstain, not Berenstein. Who believes Berenstein? If you grew up reading these books, let me know in the comments down below. Today, I'm using a Sakura Pigma Micron pen and watercolors. This is a very affordable watercolor set, and I've had this since I was in high school, like 15 years ago. Do the math. I'll be using a little bit of gouache, but that was a mistake. More on that later. When I first started thinking of the composition, I immediately thought of an isometric perspective, meaning that there's no vanishing point. That way each subject will be clearly seen without it disappearing into the distance. And apparently a lot of video games have isometric angles because it allows you to see the whole world, or I guess map, that you're playing with much more clarity, versus in real life you'll have a lot of vanishing points and you can't really see that far ahead. The main thing I thought of was bread. Lots of it. A factory that these bears go to make lots of baked goods. Part of the lore is my sister loves making bread and baked goods, and I recently started baking as well, and I love sourdough. I'm one of those sourdough people, so I'm sorry, but everyone likes it around me because they get free bread. And another thing is that this piece of art is 5 by 5 inches. And at first I thought it would be challenging to fit in a lot of small details, but it was actually quite the opposite. Well, it was the opposite. I thought it would be challenging to fit in details in such a tiny space, but it was actually harder to fill up the space. It's deceivingly large for 5 by 5 inches. And maybe next time I'll experiment with more negative space between each subject versus them being all squished together like this, but I like it. It looks abundant and it looks tasty. I haven't inked in a really long time, but I remember loving it in high school because I could put in as many details as possible, and then the watercolor after just kind of gives it that extra life. But I like to think of the inking process as me adding structure to a building, and then the watercolor process is like the decorations. And in this little part, I love this cracked egg because there totally would be a cracked egg on the floor of this factory, because these bears, as sturdy as they are, they're hard workers. Some of them could be quite clumsy. And here, I don't know, I just thought of making a pipe of milk flowing into a bucket. This is a pile of flour, and right next to it to the right is a flour mill that this hardworking bear is just grinding away. He's all about that hustle and grind, but one of his bear friend coworkers is like, look, you don't have to do this all the time. You need to find some work-life balance. You need to find time to chill. You know, your life isn't all just about this factory. And this bear is like, no. You don't understand. I have a family to feed. I can't just stop. My father's worked this way. My mother has shown me this work ethic. And then he just gets stuck in this entire cycle, and he models the same behavior for his children, which is great because he's a hard worker. But now his children don't know how to stop, and they don't know how to stop the cycle of overworking. Or is it? Is it a curse? Or is it good to overwork like that? No, it's not good to overwork like that, okay? You need to enjoy life. You can't just do work all the time like this little bear. I think that just takes away from actually living your life. I don't know how I got into this tangent. This part was pretty challenging, trying to get this angle of this bear. He's kind of in this twisted position. Yes, I think this bear is a he. We have come to a conclusion that this is my sister's partner. His name is Doug. This bear does look like a Doug to me, I think. You can't see his face though, but he's definitely a Doug. This part I did not enjoy. Okay, there was that one point where it just didn't seem like a cylinder. I extended those rings too far to the left. And for this part right here, I think I just wanted to fill up this space, but with more bread. So I thought, why not a big bucket of baguettes? And baguettes are one of my favorite breads to draw. Baguettes and boule. I think that's how you pronounce it, Boule. When I first started my digital art journey, I know this isn't digital art, obviously. I wanted to get better at my line work, and overall I think digital art has actually helped my physical art because I had so much practice trying to add in detail into my illustrations without overdoing it, without making it look overly realistic. So I love adding these little lines and dots and hashes in order to add body onto the subject. Speaking of adding body, I had a bunch of these sacks of flour right next to this gigantic flour mill, and I wanted them to look very squishy, like fat bellies. That sounds kind of creepy, but I just wanted them to look heavy. So I used a lot of these little hashes in order to make it look rotund. So the direction of the hashes that I'm making kind of round out the sacks, if that makes sense. If I'm gonna be completely transparent, I was not in love with these sacks when I first drew them, or just the idea of them. I felt like I could have added in more bread, but you know what? This is my first illustration really in probably years that I've done ink and watercolor and a whole proper scene like this, because I've just been doing a lot of sketches. And I'm not saying that sketches don't count as art, but I haven't committed myself to a full-on scene that I've created from my mind. This sounds so pretentious. I created the scene from my mind, in my mind's eye. But I did, okay? And I wanted to create this cozy area, this thing that's been in my head. This is one of my favorites. This bear is actually Amber Berry. This is the bear that's modeled after my sister's childhood teddy bear. And she has that iconic ribbon. Her ribbon is iconic between my sister and I guess. And she's the one that's kind of manning this whole production. She's making sure that everything is in check, everything is up to speed. She's making sure everyone's doing their part. And in this little side right here, this bear, I need to give it a name, but my sister and I agreed that I think this bear is me. I'm just churning butter, or I'm just whisking the butter, and there are big blocks of butter right behind this bear. I don't know if you could tell. Also, another thing, whenever I make these bears' faces, I switch out this 08 size pen because it's bigger. I switch it into an 01, which is a smaller size pen, because the bears' faces, the bears apostrophe, their faces are the details are just smaller, and I didn't want them to look too thick with a thicker pen. This one is one of my favorite parts of this entire composition. It's these rows of baked goods. On the bottom, we have pandesal, which is basically one of the most popular breads in the Philippines. And at the top, you have croissants, danishes, and boule. Now I'm erasing all the little pencil marks that I had underneath. This is them right side by side. The one on the right is it was my, what do you call that? My brainstorm session for this entire sequence, or this composition. Now this right here, you are witnessing some tomfoolery that's about to begin. I'm quite proud of those little palettes that I made though. Those are just little sample cups that I got on Amazon. And I was supposed to just use them for travel. And look at what I did. Look at what my silly self did. How silly, because gouache is very opaque. It doesn't work exactly like watercolor. It dulled down a lot of the colors that I made. Isn't that funny? So what I did was I tried to water it down as much as possible. I thought I had watered it down a lot in the beginning, but I didn't. So I went over again with ink over the gouache, and that's why it looks a little thicker. And it's thicker than what I'd normally like. So that's how this whole thing started. And then I busted out my Prang watercolors, which are very, very affordable. I just went to work. I started on this crate of eggs. And the crate of eggs, I wanted it to look like golden eggs almost. Okay, back to the gouache. I just want to talk about that foolish decision I've made. I think it would have been okay if I really watered it down. And I want to talk about those palettes because I've created a pretty good set of colors within my digital art space in my Procreate, which is the app that I normally use when I do digital drawings. I love the colors that I've composed over time in order to make all my sketches and all my illustrations, my stickers. They all come mostly from my digital art, and I wanted to emulate that in real life. So I got my gouache, which is from Holbein. I think that's how you pronounce it. Holbein? Holbein. I don't know. I'm gonna look this up. I should have looked it up before I did this voiceover. But I took those tubes and I mixed the colors in those individual little caps. I just copied all of my swatches from my Procreate, and I was so happy with them. And I was like, I can't wait to use this in the Berry Bread Factory. You know, one of my very first ink and water-based whatever scenes. And I just foolishly did not water it down enough. So I went back to watercolor. But if I want to use gouache next time, I'm definitely not going to ink first. I'm going to lay down the gouache first and then I'll put down the ink. But we'll see. I kind of like the inking and then watercolor process. Maybe I'll get higher quality watercolors next time, but I don't know. I'm kind of surprised at how nice these watercolors look. But maybe it's just because I've been so used to them that I'm like, well, I don't need to switch. They work just fine. And also, I have too many art supplies in my office. I've got some tendencies where I hoard too many art supplies and craft supplies where I'm like, well, you know, what's another one gonna do to me? It's not gonna hurt. This part, I'm so proud of myself of how I painted this pail, this bucket. Just the reflection. I've had this track record in the past where I didn't have the foresight to leave the highlights. And because I lay down this almost like very light tan beige base with that gouache that I really watered down, when I left that little piece of highlight on that pail, that piece of highlight isn't actually white. It's that like super light tan beige that I laid down, and I think it just adds into the whole warmth of this piece. I've never been confident with my colors, and I still feel like I'm not an expert. I wouldn't say that I'm a beginner, but I wouldn't even say I'm intermediate. I don't know, it's just really weird. I feel like I'm in this limbo when it comes to color. I just never felt like it was my strong suit. It helped me experiment with a lot of colors without the fear of using paper and just being really upset with it. There's no undo in physical artwork. And speaking of struggling with color, Amber Berry is a white bear, so I needed to make sure that these bears looked white without leaving them completely blank. And the shadows that I used almost had a bluish tint to it. Look at this berry lying down. My sister and I said this is our dad. This is definitely our dad. If we all worked in a kitchen. Okay, our dad, he makes really good food. But this is just so his energy. My dad throws it down in the kitchen, but I wouldn't put it past him to nap on a sack of flour in the middle of, I don't know, lunch rush in the berry bread factory. But anyway, with the bears, I did a very slight tint of blue on the edges of where their shadows are supposed to be. And I think it kind of gives it the illusion that they're white. I don't know, guys. I'm still getting better at color theory. Some artists, I feel bad for saying it, but I'm kind of just so envious sometimes of some artists because it seems like they've just got this color theory down. And I feel like I miss the memo sometimes when I think of my own art pieces. Every time I look at it, I'm like, this could look better. This could look better. But I guess a lot of artists feel that way. Or a lot of people who are so into their craft, I feel like a lot of them could be hypercritical, and I'm working on not being as hypercritical because in the past it was pretty bad, and I don't think that's good. This part, I don't know if you could tell, I was getting impatient because I just wanted to fill in the spaces without color as fast as possible, and then I started to slow down. I was like, settle down. You know, if you don't take the time to put down the color where you want it to be and take the time to mix the color that you want, it's not gonna look as much as you're not gonna like it as much as you thought it would. But also on the flip side, when I overthink things, it doesn't turn out as good as I'd expect it to be. So I have to find that middle ground. So it's like filling in the colors of the bread or the croissants as loosely as I can, and then adding in little details of a darker brown to give it that toasty effect, but not being too technical with it. And I feel like that worked pretty well. Alright, I feel like I have to explain this, but that big pot where this bear is lying down next to, that's a bunch of jam. I think it's jam. I think so, or marmalade. I honestly don't know the difference. I also need to look this up. See, another thing that I should have looked up before I did this voiceover. But that is, let's call it jam. And it's plopped into each one of these danishes. The row right in between of the croissants and the boule. The boules are those pieces of bread with a star, almost like a star shape cut out on top of them. These shelves peeking out, these kind of tested me in the beginning, but they ended up turning out a little better than I expected. I like the variety of the different perspective that it gives, where there are these breads or these baked goods in these shelves. And again, I started feeling a little impatient, but I thought, okay, just go loose with the color, lay down a solid color first, and then come back to it with maybe a secondary color just to give it a little bit more depth. And I had to dab it with a little bit of this paper towel so it wasn't so saturated. And I love how it turned out. And this is the most satisfying part. Peeling off the tape and you just see those crisp lines. I have to cut this out of this page. And this is how it turned out. The Berry Bread Factory. Look at them! They're so cute! Well, I hope you enjoyed this illustration. I just love sharing this with you guys so much, and I just feel weirdly relieved because out of all the pieces of content I've made, this one feels the most natural to me. You know, I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but I don't know. It feels good for me, and it makes me want to make more content, and I hope that you stick around and check out the other pieces. I'll see you next time.